I walked into the conference room, and my wife's dad, the fleet admiral, smirked. "What's your call sign, princess?" The men laughed. I said, "Black Widow." Look, I've been to plenty of meetings in my life, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that Navy conference rooms are where enthusiasm goes to die. Walking into that particular hellhole on a Tuesday morning, I had zero expectations beyond maybe catching a mid-presentation nap and pretending I understood whatever tactical jargon they'd be throwing around. The room smelled like industrial-strength coffee, Old Spice, and the collective anxiety of 40 officers who'd rather be literally anywhere else. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like they were slowly losing the will to live, and the air conditioning was busted, naturally, because why would the United States Navy invest in something as frivolous as breathable air? 40 officers packed into that sardine can, all dressed in their crisp white uniforms that probably cost more to dry clean than my first car. They looked like a convention of overly serious wedding cakes, and I'm pretty sure at least half of them had rehearsed their serious military face in the mirror that morning. The energy in the room was somewhere between a dental appointment and a mandatory HR seminar about workplace harassment. Everyone sat ramrod straight, clutching their coffee cups like religious artifacts, probably wondering whose brilliant idea it was to schedule this meeting at 0800 on the one morning they could have slept in. And there, positioned at the head of the table like a king surveying his unfortunately boring kingdom, sat Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt, my father-in-law, the man who probably irons his pajamas and has a color-coded system for his socks. Gregory's the kind of guy who looks like he was born in full military dress, emerged from the womb already disappointed in everyone around him. His posture could make a marble statue feel self-conscious, and I'm 90% convinced he practices his intimidating stare in front of the bathroom mirror while brushing his teeth. The man radiates authority the way a microwave radiates leftover pizza smell. You know it's there even when you can't see it. I tried to slip in quietly, find a seat in the back corner where I could observe without being observed, maybe scroll through my phone under the table like a teenager in algebra class. But no, Gregory's got eyes like a hawk that just downed 3 espressos. He spotted me before I'd taken 2 steps into the room, and I watched his face shift into what I can only describe as predatory amusement. That's never a good sign, by the way. When your father-in-law looks at you like you're the punchline to a joke only he knows, you're about to have a bad time. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation like a hot knife through butter that really didn't want to be cut. Every head swiveled toward me, 40 pairs of eyes landing on the civilian consultant in khakis who'd somehow wandered into their testosterone convention. "This is my daughter's husband, Adrian Cole. He's here today to observe and learn what real Navy work looks like." Oh, fantastic. Nothing says, "Welcome to the family," like public humiliation before breakfast. A few officers nodded politely, probably feeling secondhand embarrassment for me. One guy, a lieutenant with a face like a concerned golden retriever, mouthed sorry in my direction. I appreciated the solidarity, buddy, truly. But Gregory wasn't done. Of course he wasn't done. The man approached finishing a sentence the way some people approach climbing Everest, with meticulous planning and an unnecessary amount of drama. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like a Bond villain about to explain his unnecessarily complicated evil plan, and delivered the killing blow with a smirk sharp enough to perform surgery. "So, Adrian," he said, drawing out my name like he was testing how it tasted. "What's your call sign? I'm sure it's something adorable. Maybe. Princess." The room exploded. And I mean exploded. These grown men, officers who'd probably commanded entire operations, made life-or-death decisions, survived combat deployments, they lost it. Knee-slapping, table-banging, wheezing laughter that sounded like a pack of hyenas discovered stand-up comedy. One captain actually snorted into his coffee and started coughing. Another guy wiped tears from his eyes. The golden retriever lieutenant looked mortified on my behalf. Bless him. "Princess." He'd call me princess. In front of 40 officers. My wife's father, ladies and gentlemen, a true master of subtle warfare. I could have gotten mad. Could have stormed out, written a strongly worded text to Arya about her father's psychological warfare tactics. Maybe toilet papered his house later like a vengeful teenager. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you options. And I was about to exercise the nuclear option. I stood up slowly, taking my time, letting the laughter die down naturally. The room gradually quieted, curiosity replacing amusement. Even Gregory looked intrigued, probably expecting me to stammer out some embarrassed response or maybe crack a self-deprecating joke to diffuse the tension. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't," and locked eyes with my dear father-in-law. "Black Widow," I said simply. 2 words. That's all it took. The silence that followed was the kind you could package and sell as a luxury product. 40 jaws dropped in perfect synchronization, like some bizarre military choreography. The coffee machine in the corner actually seemed to stop percolating, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. One officer's pen fell from his hand and clattered onto the table, sounding like a gunshot in the absolute void of sound. Gregory's face went through a fascinating journey of expressions. First confusion, then recognition, then horror, all in about 3 seconds. The color drained from his cheeks faster than water from a punctured submarine, which felt appropriate given the setting. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish trying to remember how to breathe, which was genuinely the most satisfying thing I'd seen all month. Because here's what Gregory just realized, along with everyone else in that room. Black Widow wasn't just any call sign. It was the call sign, the legend, the classified operation from 5 years ago that saved 12 men during an Arctic mission everyone said was impossible. The pilot who'd flown through conditions that made experienced aviators refuse to take off. The mission that got whispered about in military circles like some kind of ghost story, except it was real, and I was standing right there. The man who'd just publicly mocked me, called me princess like I was some helpless civilian playing dress-up in his world, had just insulted the pilot who'd once saved half his fleet, including his own brother. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Golden Retriever Lieutenant looked like Christmas had come early. Another officer whispered, "Holy shit," barely audible but loud enough to break the spell. Gregory just stared at me, and for the first time since I'd met him 3 years ago, Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt had absolutely nothing to say. I sat back down, casually, like I'd just commented on the weather rather than dropped a tactical nuke into the conversation. "So," I said cheerfully, "what's on the agenda today, gentlemen? Let me tell you about my wife, Aria Holt, because understanding her is essential to understanding why I've endured 3 years of her father treating me like I'm an unfortunate stain on his family's otherwise pristine military legacy. Aria is the kind of woman who walks into a boardroom full of corporate sharks and makes them apologize for breathing too loud. I'm not exaggerating. I've witnessed it. She's a corporate attorney at one of those Manhattan firms with a name that sounds like a law school exam question. The kind of place where junior associates develop stress ulcers before their 25th birthday and coffee costs more than reasonable people spend on lunch. She's terrifyingly smart, the kind of smart that makes you feel like you're bringing a spork to a knife fight whenever you try to win an argument. She's got this way of dismantling your logic with surgical precision, making you realize halfway through your sentence that you've already lost and you're just stalling for dignity. And she's beautiful in that dangerous way that causes minor traffic accidents. I once watched a guy walk straight into a parking meter because he was too busy staring at her. She didn't even notice, just kept walking in her power suit and 4-inch heels that somehow make her move faster than normal humans in sneakers. When we met at that charity gala 3.5 years ago, I thought I was punching above my weight class. Turns out, I was punching above my weight class into a different weight class entirely, possibly in a sport I didn't even know existed. But somehow, miraculously, she liked me. She thought my reluctance to network was refreshing, which I'm pretty sure is code for charmingly antisocial. She called me mysterious when really I just had nothing interesting to say about quarterly earnings reports. Our first date lasted 6 hours. Our second date turned into a weekend. By the third month, she'd moved half her wardrobe into my apartment, which I only noticed when my closet became 30% my clothes and 70% designer suits that cost more than my truck. By month 6, I was completely, hopelessly, embarrassingly in love with her. She could quote case law while making breakfast. She could negotiate her way out of traffic tickets. She once made a telemarketer apologize to her. The woman was magnificent. Unfortunately, her father thinks no man on earth deserves her, especially not me. In Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt's meticulously organized worldview, I'm that civilian consultant his daughter inexplicably married. The guy who doesn't understand real service, despite my 12 years in active duty. See, when I left the military and started consulting, I apparently transformed from a respectable serviceman into whatever category Gregory files under professional disappointments. The man has never actually asked what I do as a consultant. I could be advising Fortune 500 companies on aviation logistics, which I am, or I could be a professional mime, and I don't think his opinion would change. Gregory's got this way of looking at me like I'm wallpaper he didn't approve of, but has to tolerate because his daughter picked it out. Not even good wallpaper. The cheap kind from a clearance bin that's already starting to peel. When I shake his hand, which happens at every family gathering because apparently we're cosplaying as people who like each other, he grips just hard enough to remind me he could crush walnuts with his bare fingers. His smile never reaches his eyes, which stay cold and evaluating, like he's constantly calculating exactly how much disappointment I represent. Family dinners at the Holt residence are combat missions disguised as pot roast. Margaret, Aria's mom, is a sweet woman who makes Pinterest-worthy meals and desperately tries to pretend her family isn't engaged in psychological warfare over the green beans. She's mastered the art of aggressively cheerful conversation topics. Isn't the weather lovely? She'll chirp, while Gregory launches another conversational missile at my civilian career choices. Adrian, more wine? She'll offer, pouring before I can answer, probably hoping alcohol will prevent bloodshed. Gregory delivers his passive-aggressive jabs with the precision of a surgeon or possibly a sniper. Adrian, he'll say, cutting his steak with unnecessary force. I heard the Navy's hiring civilian contractors. Perhaps you could contribute something meaningful. He says, meaningful, like it tastes bad in his mouth, like he's chewing on expired milk. Aria squeezes my hand under the table so hard I lose feeling in my fingers. It's her version of Morse code. Please don't engage. Please don't engage. I'm begging you. I keep smiling, playing the dutiful son-in-law, stacking mashed potatoes on my plate like sandbags in preparation for the next assault. That's an interesting idea, sir. I'll respond, voice perfectly neutral, while internally composing speeches about how my consulting work actually supports military operations, but sure, let's pretend I'm useless. One particularly memorable dinner involved Gregory explaining, in excruciating detail, the importance of commitment to service while looking directly at me. Some people serve their entire lives, he said, with the enthusiasm of a funeral director discussing casket options. Others just dabble and move on to more comfortable options. He practically spat the word comfortable like it was an accusation. Like I'd betrayed my country by not dying in uniform. Aria's younger brother, Marcus, usually attends these dinners too. He's a Marine, which Gregory approves of, and he's got the decency to look uncomfortable during his father's verbal sparring matches. Dad, Marcus tried once. Adrian served 12 years. That's not exactly dabbling. Gregory responded by asking Marcus about his recent deployment, effectively changing the subject and proving that acknowledging my service might cause him physical pain. After one particularly brutal dinner where Gregory questioned whether consulting required actual skills or just networking and business cards, Aria apologized so profusely in the car that I thought she might hyperventilate. I'm so sorry, she kept saying, gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to strangle it. He's impossible. He's insufferable. I don't know why he's like this with you. Your dad's got a unique sense of humor, I told her, which was the diplomatic version of what I was actually thinking. He's just old school, she defended weakly, because she's a good daughter even when her father's being a complete jackass. Yeah, I replied, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. Like telegrams and polio. Really takes you back. She snorted, then laughed, then felt guilty for laughing. I shouldn't encourage you. Honey, if I can survive military training, I can survive your dad's dinner table warfare. Besides, I squeezed her hand. You're worth it. Even when he called your job, retired military light, last week. Even then. Though I'm keeping a running list of insults for potential future use. The truth is, I endured Gregory's condescension because I loved his daughter more than I hated being treated like a disappointing appliance. Every eye roll, every dismissive comment, every time he introduced me as Aria's husband, without mentioning my name, I absorbed it because the alternative was causing problems for the woman I'd have walked through fire for. Arya didn't ask me to tolerate it. She apologized constantly, offered to confront him, suggested we skip family dinners entirely. But I knew something Gregory didn't know. Someday, somehow, the truth would surface. And when it did, when Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt finally discovered that the civilian consultant he'd been mocking was actually Black Widow, the pilot who'd saved his brother's life during that Arctic nightmare, well, that would be a dinner conversation worth attending. 5 years earlier, before I became known as Arya's husband, or that civilian consultant, before I had to endure family dinners that felt like depositions, I was Major Adrian Cole, United States Navy helicopter pilot, call sign Black Widow. And let me tell you, that call sign wasn't handed out for participation. You don't get nicknamed after a deadly spider because you're mediocre at your job. You get it because you do things that make other pilots shake their heads and say, that crazy bastard actually pulled it off. February 2019. Arctic Circle. The kind of place that makes you question every life choice that led you to a location where your eyelashes can literally freeze together. We're talking minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's before you factor in the wind chill, which was apparently in a competition with hell to see, which could be more unbearable. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was actively malicious, like it had personal beef with anything trying to stay warm or, alive. I was stationed at a forward operating base that looked like someone had dropped a collection of shipping containers onto the tundra and called it infrastructure. Everything was gray, white, or that depressing beige color that military installations seem to buy in bulk. The coffee tasted like it had been brewed through someone's boot. The heating system worked approximately 60% of the time, and every morning you had to check that all your extremities were still attached and functional. The mission brief came in at 0400, which is military speak for an hour when reasonable people are still asleep. A 12-man recon team had gotten trapped during what the meteorologists were calling a significant weather event. Now, I appreciate military euphemisms as much as the next guy, but let's call it what it actually was, a snow-coated death blender. A blizzard so intense that it looked like God was having a temper tantrum and decided to throw all the weather at once at this particular patch of frozen wasteland. These guys had been out on a routine reconnaissance patrol, which in the Arctic means routine, the way juggling chainsaws is routine if you do it regularly. Their vehicles had gotten stuck, their communications were spotty at best, and they were approximately 3 hours away from becoming the world's most disappointed popsicles. The temperature was dropping, the wind was picking up, and their shelter situation was basically huddle together and hope thermodynamics works in our favor. Command looked at the weather data and made the entirely reasonable decision that the storm was unflyable. The winds were gusting up to 70 miles per hour. Visibility was measured in feet, not miles. Snow was coming down so hard it looked like someone had put the sky on a turbo setting. Every senior pilot in the room nodded sagely and agreed that attempting a rescue would be suicide. They started discussing alternate plans, like waiting for the storm to pass, which would have been great except the recon team didn't have wait 12 hours as an option in their survival playbook. I looked at the weather data, looked at the map coordinates, did some mental calculations that were probably more optimistic than realistic, and said what any sensible person would say, hold my coffee. The room went quiet. My commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Reeves, gave me the look that superior officers give subordinates who've just volunteered for something stupid. Major Cole, she said slowly, like she was talking to someone who'd suffered a recent head injury. Did you not hear the part about unflyable conditions? I heard it, ma'am. I'm just choosing to interpret it as extremely inadvisable rather than completely impossible. Those are the same thing, Major. Not technically, ma'am. One leaves room for optimism. Colonel Reeves pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture I'd seen her make approximately 47 times during my service under her command. You're going to give me an ulcer? Medical would probably appreciate the job security, ma'am. She didn't approve the mission so much as stop actively forbidding it, which in military terms is basically a thumbs up. If you die out there, I'm putting reckless stupidity as cause of death on the paperwork. Fair enough, ma'am. I'll try to avoid giving you that satisfaction. My co-pilot for this particular adventure into questionable decision-making was Lieutenant Miles Parker, a guy who'd flown with me enough times to know that when I said something would be fine, It usually meant prepare for an experience you'll either never forget or never remember, depending on head trauma. Miles was a good pilot, solid nerves, excellent technical skills, and a deeply religious man who I'm pretty sure aged 5 years during every mission we flew together. We suited up in enough cold weather gear to make us look like we were auditioning for an Arctic expedition documentary. Layers upon layers of thermal protection, face masks, gloves so thick you could barely operate the controls, and the kind of boots that made you walk like you'd forgotten how legs worked. By the time we were fully dressed, we looked less like pilots and more like overstuffed teddy bears who'd raided a military surplus store. The helicopter we were taking was a UH-60, affectionately called a Black Hawk, which I'd personally nicknamed Please Don't Kill Me Today because I believe in honest communication with my aircraft. We did the pre-flight check-in conditions that made the act of standing upright feel like an achievement. The wind was already trying to push us over. Snow was accumulating on every surface faster than we could clear it, and visibility was what I'd generously describe as terrible. Adrian, Miles said through the comm system, his voice carrying that special tone of a man who's reconsidering his career choices. I feel obligated to point out that this is insane. Duly noted, Miles. Your objection has been logged and will be completely ignored. I'm praying. I'm praying so hard right now. Great. Pray for good visibility while you're at it. Could really use some. We lifted off into what can only be described as flying inside a washing machine filled with ice and rage. The wind hit us immediately, shoving the helicopter sideways like we'd personally offended it. Snow plastered against the windscreen so fast the wipers could barely keep up, creating this strobe effect where you could see for half a second before everything went white again. It was like trying to navigate through the inside of a snow globe being shaken by an angry toddler. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Miles muttered, gripping his controls so tight I could hear his knuckles cracking over the comm. Pretty sure they're not available for this mission, Miles. It's just us and questionable aerodynamics. Flying in a wideout is a special kind of psychological torture. There's no horizon, no reference points, nothing to tell you which way is up except your instruments. And you have to trust those instruments with your life, while every instinct screams that you're about to crash. Your brain gets confused, your equilibrium goes haywire, and the only thing standing between you and becoming a very expensive crater is training and stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality. Miles spent the entire flight praying so loudly it probably caused radio interference with other frequencies. I could hear him cycling through every prayer he'd ever learned, making up new ones, possibly negotiating directly with God about future church attendance in exchange for survival. The flight to the coordinates where the recon team was stranded should have taken 30 minutes under normal conditions. This took an hour and 15 minutes of pure, concentrated terror disguised as professional aviation. Every gust of wind felt like someone was playing ping pong with our helicopter, batting us around the sky for entertainment. The temperature inside the cockpit was cold enough that I could see my breath, and that's with the heating system running full blast, which tells you everything you need to know about how well our equipment was handling the Arctic's personal vendetta against human survival. Visibility is approximately 15 feet, I said into the comm, trying to sound calm and professional while internally screaming. 15 feet? Miles responded, his voice climbing an octave. Adrian, we're flying at 120 knots. We've got less than a second to react to anything. Then I guess we better have good reflexes. Now's a great time to mention I had 3 cups of coffee this morning, so I'm extremely alert. That's not reassuring. That's the opposite of reassuring. The GPS coordinates were our only lifeline in this white nightmare. I kept my eyes glued to the instruments, cross-referencing our position, altitude, and heading every few seconds because one mistake, one moment of spatial disorientation, and we'd auger straight into the ice like the world's most expensive lawn dart. The altimeter became my new best friend, the compass my second favorite companion, and the artificial horizon the only thing preventing me from completely losing my mind. Miles continued his prayer marathon, now apparently negotiating with various saints. I heard him promise Saint Christopher that he'd name his firstborn after him, which seemed like a big commitment considering Miles wasn't even dating anyone. But desperate times call for desperate measures and creative bargaining with the divine. 20 minutes into the flight, we hit turbulence that made everything before it seem like a gentle massage. The helicopter dropped 50 feet in about 2 seconds. My stomach relocated to somewhere near my throat, and I heard Miles make a sound that I can only describe as what would happen if a squeak toy achieved consciousness, and immediately regretted it. "We're good. We're good," I shouted, fighting the controls to level us out. That was just a little excitement. A little excitement? Adrian, I just saw my life flash before my eyes. And honestly, it was pretty boring until this exact moment when I apparently decided to die in the Arctic. Nobody's dying today, Miles. I didn't fly through this frozen hell just to become a cautionary tale in flight school. The radio crackled with static, then a weak voice came through. "Any aircraft, this is Recon Team Delta. We're at the coordinates. Visibility 0. We can hear rotors. Delta, this is Black Widow." I responded, using my call sign because it sounded way more badass than Major Cole, who's currently questioning his life choices. "We're approximately 5 minutes from your position. Pop smoke when you hear us overhead." "Copy that. Black Widow. We've got orange smoke ready." Finding them in that whiteout was like trying to locate a specific snowflake in a blizzard. We reached the coordinates and started a search pattern, flying low and slow, which in these conditions was like painting a target on ourselves for the wind to practice its bullying techniques. The helicopter shook and bucked, protesting every second of this abuse, and I swear I could hear the mechanical equivalent of "I didn't sign up for this" coming from the engine. Then Miles spotted it. Orange smoke. 2 o'clock, about 100 yards. I saw it too, a small plume of orange cutting through the white, like a tiny beacon of hope in the middle of nature's temper tantrum. The recon team had taken shelter behind some ice formations that provided minimal protection from the wind, but at least prevented them from being sandblasted or snowblasted to death. "All right, Miles, here's where it gets interesting." It wasn't interesting before. That was just the warm-up. Now we have to hover in place while they board, in winds that want to flip us like a pancake. I would like to go on record as saying this is a terrible plan. Noted, your objection has been filed in the too late now category. Hovering in those conditions required every ounce of skill, concentration, and stubborn determination I possessed. The wind pushed us left, I compensated right. It shoved us down, I added power. It tried to spin us like a top. I fought the pedals to keep our nose pointed in the right direction. My hands moved constantly on the controls, making micro-adjustments every fraction of a second, like playing the world's most stressful video game, where the penalty for losing was death. The recon team moved fast. I'll give them credit. They were cold, exhausted, probably scared out of their minds, but they hustled to the helicopter like their lives depended on it, which was accurate. I kept my eyes on the instruments, trusting my peripheral vision and Miles to count them in. 4 aboard. 8 aboard, 10 aboard. Miles called out each milestone like a sports announcer at the world's coldest, most dangerous game. The helicopter groaned under the additional weight, handling getting mushier as we packed 12 freezing men into a space designed for slightly fewer freezing men. The wind seemed to notice we were heavier and decided to try even harder to kill us, because apparently it took this personally. 12. All aboard. Get us the hell out of here. I didn't need to be told twice. I pulled power and pushed forward on the cyclic, transitioning from hover to forward flight with all the grace of a drunk elephant. But we were moving, and that's what mattered. The helicopter clawed its way forward through the snow and wind, groaning and shaking like it was as done with this mission as Miles was. The flight back was somehow worse than the flight there, probably because we were heavier, definitely because I'd burned through most of my adrenaline and was now running on pure spite and caffeine. My hands ached from gripping the controls, my back screamed from the tension, and I'm pretty sure I'd sweated through every layer of thermal clothing despite the freezing temperature. Miles had moved beyond prayer into what I can only describe as religious bargaining combined with motivational speaking. "Come on, baby, you can do it," he murmured, either talking to the helicopter, God, or possibly himself. "Just a little further. We're almost there. You're doing great. Please don't die. Please don't let us die." When the base finally appeared through the snow, looking like the most beautiful collection of ugly gray buildings I'd ever seen, I felt something in my chest unclench. We landed hard, not my smoothest touchdown, but considering we'd just flown through conditions that should have been impossible, I was calling it a win. The rotors were still spinning down when the medical team rushed the helicopter, pulling out the recon team members who were varying degrees of hypothermic and grateful. I sat in the pilot's seat, hands still on the controls, unable to move because my muscles had apparently frozen in position. Miles looked over at me, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Adrian," he said slowly, "I would like to never do that again." "Agreed. Let's put that on the once was enough list." "I'm serious. I aged 15 years during that flight. I'm filing for early retirement based on accelerated aging." I finally managed to release the controls, my fingers cramping as they uncurled. "Miles, we just saved 12 lives." "I know, and I'm thrilled. Truly. But also, I hate you a little bit right now." "Fair." When I finally climbed out of the helicopter, my legs shaky and my hands numb, Colonel Reeves was standing there with an expression that mixed relief, anger, and grudging respect. "Major Cole," she said, "that was the most recklessly brilliant thing I've ever witnessed." "Thank you, ma'am. I think. Don't thank me. I'm writing this up, and I genuinely don't know if you're getting a medal or a psych eval." Turned out, I got both. That's when Black Widow stopped being just a call sign and became a rumor, a legend, the story that pilots told each other about the crazy bastard who flew through the impossible and lived to tell about it. Here's the kicker that makes this whole story go from ironic to downright cosmic joke territory. One of those 12 guys we pulled out of that frozen hellscape was Commander Dean Holt, Gregory's younger brother. And before you ask, no, I had absolutely no idea at the time. When you're pulling half-frozen men into your helicopter while fighting winds that want to turn you into an Arctic snow globe ornament, you're not exactly checking their family trees or asking about their relationships to future fathers-in-law who'll eventually make your life miserable over pot roast. Dean was the 8th guy through the door, and I remember him specifically because even while practically hypothermic, even with his face covered in ice and his body shaking like a paint mixer, he managed to grin. Not a small smile, a full-on grin, like he'd just won the lottery instead of nearly becoming a statistic. The medic was wrapping him in thermal blankets, checking his vitals, and Dean looked up at me from his position on the floor of the helicopter and gave me a thumbs up that probably took all his remaining energy. "Remind me to buy you a drink when we get back," he shouted over the rotor noise, his voice hoarse, but somehow still carrying that tone of a guy who refused to let a little thing like almost dying ruin his day. I gave him a quick salute, focused on keeping us airborne and not crashing into the tundra, and filed the comment away under nice gestures from grateful people I'll probably never see again. Military life is full of those brief connections, people you save or work with or share a foxhole with for a hot minute before you all get scattered back to your regular assignments, and the moment becomes just another story you tell at bars. Except Dean Holt didn't let it become just another story. The guy tracked me down 2 days after we'd all thawed out, and our core body temperatures returned to levels compatible with human life. I was in the mess hall, eating something that was theoretically scrambled eggs, but had the texture of rubber and the taste of regret, when this tall guy in navy fatigues walked up to my table, carrying 2 cups of coffee that actually smelled like coffee instead of industrial solvent. "Major Cole," he said, setting 1 cup in front of me. "I owe you a drink. But given our current location and the Navy's strict policies about alcohol on base, coffee will have to do. Fair warning, I'm told I make terrible coffee, but it's the thought that counts." I looked up at him, recognized him as guy number 8 from the rescue, and gestured to the seat across from me. "Commander, you didn't have to track me down. You guys were the ones stuck in the snow. I was just driving the taxi." "Driving the taxi," he repeated, sitting down and laughing like I'd said something hilarious instead of deflective. "Right, because flying through a blizzard that grounded every other aircraft on base is just basic taxi service. Do you also do airport runs? What's your rate for weddings?" I liked him immediately. He had that rare quality of being able to joke about his own near-death experience without making it weird or heavy. Some people survive something traumatic and can't talk about it without getting dark. Others won't shut up about it in a way that makes everyone uncomfortable. Dean had found that sweet spot of acknowledging it happened while refusing to let it define him. We ended up talking for over an hour. Turned out Dean was a tactical operations officer, had been in the Navy for 15 years, loved terrible action movies and good whiskey, had strong opinions about whether hot dogs were sandwiches, and was generally the kind of guy who made conversation feel easy. He told me about his team, about how they'd kept morale up during those hours waiting for rescue by debating increasingly stupid hypothetical scenarios. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Apparently consumed a good 30 minutes of their time. My brother's in Navy Command, he mentioned casually at one point. Gregory Holt. Real hard ass, but he's good at what he does. Probably would have had a heart attack if he'd known I was out there. I nodded, not thinking much of it. The name Gregory Holt meant nothing to me at the time. I wasn't exactly keeping up with the who's who of Navy admirals. Brothers in the service. That's got to be interesting family dynamics. You have no idea, Dean laughed. Gregory's the golden child, always has been. Did everything by the book, perfect service record, probably bleeds navy blue. Me? I'm the screw-up younger brother who keeps giving him gray hair. But he loves me, even if he shows it by being a control freak about every mission I run. Over the next few weeks, Dean and I crossed paths a few more times, grabbed meals together, complained about the cold, discussed the finer points of helicopter mechanics versus fixed-wing aircraft. He invited me to his quarters once to watch the worst action movie I'd ever seen, something called Arctic Assault that made Sharknado look like high cinema. We threw popcorn at the screen and provided our own sarcastic commentary track. If my brother saw this movie, he'd write a 10-page report on everything they got wrong about military protocol. Dean said, watching the hero pilot do something aerodynamically impossible while also shooting bad guys. Sounds like a fun guy at parties, I replied. Oh, he's a blast. Really knows how to lighten a room by explaining proper chain of command procedures. The medal ceremony happened about 6 weeks after the rescue. The Navy loves its ceremonies, loves its pomp and circumstance, loves pinning shiny things on people while everyone stands at attention and pretends their feet don't hurt. They'd decided that Operation Frost Line, as they'd officially designated our little Arctic adventure, warranted recognition. Miles and I were getting the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism and extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. The ceremony was held in a hangar that had been cleaned within an inch of its life, decorated with flags, and filled with officers in their dress uniforms looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. Miles looked nervous, kept adjusting his uniform like it didn't fit right, which it probably didn't because dress uniforms are designed to look good in photos, not feel comfortable on actual human bodies. And the officer chosen to present the medals was Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt, Dean's brother, though I still didn't make the connection because apparently I'm phenomenally unobservant about these things. He was this tall, stern-looking guy with perfect posture and an expression that suggested smiling might violate some regulation. He looked like the kind of officer who irons his socks and has strong opinions about thread count. Dean was in the audience, grinning like a proud parent, which should have been my first clue about the family connection, but my brain was too busy being nervous about the ceremony to connect the dots. Gregory read our citations in a voice that could probably command respect from furniture. When he pinned the medal on my chest, he looked me directly in the eye, shook my hand with a grip that tested bone density, and said, "Major Cole, your actions saved 12 men, including valuable personnel critical to ongoing operations. The Navy is grateful for your service." "Thank you, sir," I replied, standing ramrod straight, trying to look like I deserved the medal instead of feeling like I'd just done my job with extra steps. After the ceremony, Dean found me, practically tackled me with a hug that would have gotten him written up for breaking protocol. "That's my brother," he said, gesturing to where Gregory was making the rounds, shaking hands with other officers. "The guy who pinned your medal. Small world, right?" And that's when I finally connected the dots. Dean Holt, Gregory Holt, brothers. The stern admiral was the control freak older sibling Dean had joked about. The universe apparently thought this was hilarious. 6 months later, Dean died on a mission in the Middle East. An operation that went sideways, bad intelligence, wrong place at the wrong time. The official report said, killed in action during combat operations. The unofficial truth was that someone higher up had ordered the mission to proceed despite questionable intel, and that someone was Gregory. I heard about it through the military grapevine, that informal network of information that spreads faster than official channels. Dean Holt, the guy who'd bought me coffee and laughed about duck-sized horses, was gone. I attended the memorial service, stood in the back, watched Gregory deliver a eulogy with perfect composure while his eyes betrayed the devastation underneath. The irony didn't escape me then, and it sure as hell doesn't escape me now. The man who would eventually become my father-in-law, who would mock me at family dinners and call me princess in front of 40 officers, once pinned a medal on me for saving his brother's life. He just never knew that the pilot he'd commended and the civilian consultant he'd dismiss were the same person. Until that conference room, anyway. Until Black Widow detonated like a verbal grenade and Gregory's face went through every shade of pale as he finally connected the dots I'd connected years earlier. Let me paint you a picture of how I met the woman who would eventually become both the love of my life and the reason I'd have to endure years of her father treating me like sentient disappointment. It was a veterans charity gala, one of those events where rich people wear expensive clothes, drink expensive alcohol, and write checks to feel good about supporting the troops without actually having to talk to any troops about anything uncomfortable like PTSD or the VA's legendary incompetence. The venue was some hotel ballroom in Manhattan that probably cost more to rent for one night than I made in 6 months. All crystal chandeliers and marble floors and the kind of carpet that makes you feel bad for walking on it with regular person shoes. I'd been dragged there by Miles, my former co-pilot and current best friend, who'd somehow gotten us tickets through his cousin who worked in fundraising or event planning or some job that involved coordinating things while looking stressed and carrying a clipboard. "Come on, Adrian," he'd said when I'd initially declined. "Free food, open bar, and it's for a good cause. Plus, you never leave your apartment. I'm starting to think you're part hermit crab. Hermit crabs have shells. I have a lease. Totally different. You know what I mean. You're becoming one of those guys who talks to his houseplants. I have one succulent, and I only talk to it when it's dying, which is constantly because apparently I'm bad at keeping even low-maintenance plants alive." But Miles had persisted with the determination of a man who'd survived the Arctic with me and figured that entitled him to meddle in my social life. So I put on my one decent suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews and funerals and hadn't worn in approximately 8 months, discovered it still fit, which was a minor miracle, and showed up to this gala feeling like an imposter at a party where everyone else knew the secret handshake. The room was packed with the kind of people who use summer as a verb and have strong opinions about which Hamptons Beach is too commercial now. Women in dresses that cost more than my truck, men in suits that probably had Italian names I couldn't pronounce, everyone holding wine glasses like they were accessories instead of drinking vessels. The conversations around me were a mix of charity talk, business networking, and the kind of humble bragging that rich people do where they complain about problems that aren't actually problems. Our villa in Tuscany needs a new roof, and finding good help for the yacht is impossible these days. I was nursing a beer, probably the only person in the room drinking beer instead of wine or champagne, standing near a column like it might provide cover from having to make small talk with hedge fund managers who wanted to thank me for my service while simultaneously asking if I had any stock tips. Miles had abandoned me approximately 15 minutes in, spotting someone he knew from college and diving into a conversation about fantasy football or craft beer or whatever topic men discuss when they're pretending networking is the same as friendship. That's when I saw her. Arya walked up to the bar with the kind of confidence that makes you sit up straighter instinctively, like your posture is trying to impress her without consulting your brain first. She was wearing this dark blue dress that probably had a designer name attached to it. Her hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but definitely wasn't, and she moved through the crowd like she owned the place or at least had comprehensive insurance on it. She ordered a martini, extra dry, with 3 olives, and the specificity of the order told me this was a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. The bartender, who'd been moving at the pace of a sedated sloth all evening, suddenly became efficient, mixing her drink like she was the only customer in the room. She turned, drink in hand, and looked directly at me. Not the scanning look people do at parties where they're checking if you're important enough to talk to, but actual eye contact that lasted long enough to be intentional. Then she walked over, heels clicking on the marble floor, and leaned against my column like she'd decided it was now our shared territory. "You look like you hate small talk," she said, taking a sip of her martini without breaking eye contact. I appreciated the directness immediately. "No, nice weather we're having. Or do you come to these events often?" Just straight to the observation that I was probably the most uncomfortable person in a 50-foot radius. Only when it's accurate, I replied, which was my way of confirming her assessment while trying to sound clever instead of antisocial. She smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd won a point in a game I didn't know we were playing. Let me guess. You're here because someone dragged you. You're drinking beer instead of wine because you refuse to pretend you care about bouquet and finish, and you've been calculating the earliest socially acceptable time you can leave without offending anyone. That's disturbingly accurate. Are you some kind of mind reader? Or is my discomfort just that obvious? Little of both. I'm Arya. She extended her hand, and her handshake was firm enough to be professional but not aggressive, which I appreciated because some people shake hands like they're trying to win an arm wrestling match. Adrian. And yes, before you ask, I am counting down the minutes until I can escape. What if I told you the night might get more interesting? I'd say you're either overestimating this event or you know something I don't. She laughed, actually laughed, not the polite networking chuckle people do at parties. I'm a corporate attorney. These events are part of my job description. I've mastered the art of looking engaged while being completely bored. You, on the other hand, look like you're about to fake a medical emergency to escape. I was considering a sudden allergic reaction to pretension. That's a good one. I usually go with urgent work emergency, but medical might be more believable. We talked for 20 minutes standing by that column, and it was the easiest conversation I'd had in months. She was funny in this dry, sharp way that made you feel like you'd passed some kind of test when you made her laugh. She asked what I did, and when I told her I was a consultant for aviation logistics, she didn't do the glazed eye thing people usually do. Instead, she asked actually intelligent questions about risk assessment and supply chain management that proved she was listening instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. So you keep helicopters in the air, she summarized. Basically, less exciting than it sounds. Everything sounds less exciting than it actually is when you're at a charity gala trying to justify why you're drinking a $6 beer in a room where the wine costs $50 a glass. The beer was free, I pointed out. Even better, you're getting $6 of value at zero cost. That's just good economics. I found out she worked at some massive law firm in Manhattan, specialized in corporate litigation, and had a schedule that made my consulting work look like part-time hobby. She told me about a case she was working on where two companies were fighting over a patent dispute that basically came down to whether a rectangle with rounded corners was sufficiently different from a regular rectangle. I'm billing $300 an hour to argue about corners, she said. Sometimes I question my life choices. At least you're not arguing about duck-sized horses, I replied, thinking about Dean and our hypothetical debates. Now that sounds more interesting. What's the context? I told her about the Arctic rescue, gave her the sanitized version without the parts about thinking we might die, and she listened with actual interest instead of the fake interest people usually show when veterans tell stories. So you're a pilot, she said. Was. Now I'm a consultant who occasionally misses the excitement of fighting winds that want to murder me. I get that. Sometimes I miss law school when the biggest stress was finals instead of clients who think I can bend reality to match their expectations. By the end of the night, I hadn't talked to anyone else. Miles found me around 10, saw me still talking to Arya, gave me a thumbs up that he thought was subtle but absolutely wasn't, and disappeared back into the crowd. The charity auction happened. People bid ridiculous amounts on things like dinner with a celebrity chef and weekend in Napa, and Arya provided running commentary that made me laugh hard enough that people looked over. When the event finally wound down, when people started making their exits and the bartender began cleaning up with the enthusiasm of someone whose shift should have ended an hour ago, Arya handed me her phone. Put your number in, she said, and it wasn't a question. I stared at the phone like it might be a trap. You sure? I'm terrible at texting. I'm one of those people who takes hours to respond and then sends a message that's just okay. Then call. I like men who know what buttons to press. Game over. I was hooked. I put my number in her phone. She sent me a text right there that just said, proof of concept, and I saved her contact with probably too much enthusiasm for a grown man. Our first date was dinner at this Italian place in Brooklyn that she picked. She showed up in jeans and a sweater instead of the power suit I'd half expected, looked even better somehow, and proceeded to argue with me about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie for 45 minutes. It takes place during Christmas, I argued. That doesn't make it a Christmas movie. By that logic, Batman Returns is a Christmas movie. Batman Returns is a Christmas movie. She threw a breadstick at me. An actual breadstick. I caught it, ate it, and fell a little bit more in love. Our second date turned into a weekend because neither of us wanted it to end. We got brunch, walked through Central Park, saw a movie we both hated, and spent an hour afterward dissecting why it was terrible, got dinner, and somehow ended up at her apartment at 2 in the morning talking about everything and nothing. By month 3, half her wardrobe had migrated to my place. By month 6, I was completely, hopelessly, embarrassingly in love with this woman who could quote case law while making breakfast and once made a telemarketer apologize to her. She was magnificent, terrifying, brilliant, and somehow thought I was worth her time. I still don't know what I did to deserve her, but I wasn't about to question it. Meeting Aria's father for the first time was like preparing for a job interview, a hostage negotiation, and a performance review all rolled into one supremely uncomfortable evening. She'd warned me, of course, dropped hints over the 3 months we'd been dating that her father was particular about who she dated, which I've learned is code for he thinks no one is good enough and will make that abundantly clear through strategic use of disappointment. He's just protective, Aria said the morning of the dinner, watching me try on my third shirt and hate all of them equally. He'll warm up to you once he gets to know you. Honey, you've told me he made your last boyfriend cry during dessert. Actual tears. Over tiramisu. That boyfriend was a hedge fund manager who couldn't explain what a hedge fund actually did. Dad doesn't suffer fools. Great. Super reassuring. What if I say something stupid? What if I use the wrong fork? Do you people have multiple forks? She kissed me, which was her way of telling me to stop spiraling while also confirming that yes, there would definitely be multiple forks. Just be yourself. He'll love you. You're a terrible liar. One of your few flaws. The dinner was at the Holt family home in a Connecticut suburb that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought cozy mint could host a small military regiment. The house was one of those colonial-style places with actual columns, a driveway that could accommodate 6 cars, and landscaping so perfect it looked like the bushes were required to maintain formation. I pulled up in my truck, which suddenly seemed very blue-collar parked next to what I assumed was Gregory's Mercedes and Margaret's Lexus, and seriously considered just driving away and faking my own death. Aria squeezed my hand as we walked to the door. Breathe. It's just dinner. Just dinner. Right. Dinner with a fleet admiral who probably has opinions about my posture. Margaret Holt answered the door, and thank God for Margaret Holt, because she was exactly the kind of warm, maternal presence that could make you forget you were walking into an evaluation disguised as a family meal. She was shorter than Aria, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd been welcomed into a conspiracy of kindness. Adrian, we're so happy to finally meet you. She hugged me before I could offer a handshake, the kind of hug that mothers give when they're trying to compensate for other family members' emotional unavailability. Aria talks about you constantly. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. The house interior looked like a Pottery Barn catalog had merged with a military museum. Family photos lined the hallways, many featuring Gregory in various uniforms throughout his career, each one documenting his rise through the ranks like a photographic resume. There were medals and shadow boxes, a flag that had clearly been folded with religious precision, and enough naval memorabilia to stock a small gift shop. And then there was Gregory, standing in the living room like he'd been positioned there by a photographer trying to capture intimidating authority figure for a stock photo website. He was tall, probably 6'2", with silver hair cut in a style that suggested his barber used a level and protractor. His posture was so perfect it made my spine feel inadequate. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt that had been ironed to the point of achieving sentience, and his expression suggested he was already disappointed before I'd even said hello. Admiral Holt. I extended my hand, trying to remember everything Aria had coached me about. Firm handshake, eye contact. Don't call him Greg under any circumstances. His handshake felt like he was testing whether my bones were regulation density. Mr. Cole, Aria tells me you work in aviation consulting. The way he said aviation consulting made it sound like I'd told him I was a professional thumb twiddler. I felt Aria tense beside me, already preparing for conversational intervention. Yes, sir. I work with companies on logistics, supply chain management, risk assessment for helicopter operations. Ah, he said, in a tone that contained volumes of unspoken judgment. The support sector. Support sector. Like I provided administrative assistance to people doing real work instead of actually doing real work myself. I felt my jaw tighten but kept smiling because Aria's hand had found mine and was squeezing hard enough to cut off circulation, which was her version of Morse code for "please don't start an argument in the first 5 minutes." Something like that, sir. I managed, taking the high road even though the low road was looking increasingly appealing. Margaret saved us by announcing dinner was ready, herding us toward the dining room like a sheepdog who'd mastered the art of defusing tension through strategic use of pot roast. And she wasn't kidding about the multiple forks. The table was set like we were hosting minor royalty, with enough silverware to perform surgery and plates that looked like they required insurance. Aria's younger brother Marcus was already seated, and he gave me a sympathetic look that suggested he'd been through this before with other boyfriends who'd run the Gregory gauntlet. He was in his early 20s, buzz-cut, Marine Corps dress uniform because apparently even casual family dinners required formal military attire in this house. Marcus Holt. He introduced himself, shaking my hand with significantly less bone-crushing intent than his father. "Welcome to the Thunderdome. I hope you like your meat well done because Mom's scared of bacteria." "Marcus," Margaret chided gently. "It's medium well, and that's a perfectly reasonable temperature." Dinner started civilly enough. Margaret asked about my work with genuine interest, and I gave her the extended version about how I transitioned from active duty to consulting, how I worked with companies to improve their safety protocols and efficiency standards. She asked good questions, nodded along, and generally acted like a normal person having a normal conversation. Gregory, meanwhile, ate his pot roast with the precision of a man dissecting evidence. Every few minutes, he'd interject with what I started mentally categorizing as professional negging. "Consulting," he'd say, cutting his meat with unnecessary force. "Interesting choice. Most officers I knew stayed in service until retirement. I served 12 years, sir. Felt like it was time for a change." 12 years. Some might call that getting started. Aria's fork hit her plate a little harder than necessary. "Dad, 12 years is a significant commitment." "Of course, sweetheart. I'm just noting that some people have different definitions of commitment." Marcus coughed into his napkin, and I was pretty sure he was hiding a laugh. Margaret immediately offered more wine, pouring with the urgency of someone trying to prevent bloodshed through strategic alcohol distribution. The interrogation continued through the main course. Gregory asked about my family background, where I grew up, what my parents did, each question feeling less like curiosity and more like a background check. When I mentioned my father had been a construction foreman, I swear I saw Gregory's eye twitch, like he'd just confirmed some suspicion about my unsuitability for his daughter. "Construction. Honest work," he said, which should have been a compliment, but somehow sounded like condolences. "He built things that lasted," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Including a work ethic he passed down." "I'm sure," Gregory said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't sure at all. By the time dessert arrived, Margaret's homemade apple pie that probably took hours and deserved better than to be eaten during this passive-aggressive Olympics. I'd been asked about my financial planning, my career goals, my 5-year plan, and whether I'd considered more stable career paths. It was like being audited by someone who was personally offended by my tax returns. The final blow came when Gregory leaned back in his chair, pie finished, and delivered what I'm sure he thought was fatherly concern, but landed more like a character assassination disguised as advice. "Adrian, I'm sure you're a capable young man, but my daughter is extraordinary. She deserves someone who understands what real service means, what sacrifice looks like. Someone with discipline and purpose." The implication hung in the air like a fart no one wanted to acknowledge. I wasn't that person. I was the civilian consultant who'd left the military, who came from a working-class background, who didn't understand real service the way Gregory defined it. Aria stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "We should go. Adrian has an early meeting tomorrow." I didn't have an early meeting, but I appreciated the exit strategy. We said our goodbyes, Margaret hugging me again and whispering he'll come around, which was sweet, but probably delusional. Marcus fist bumped me on the way out and muttered, "You did better than the last guy." He left during the main course. In the car, Aria apologized until I thought she might pass out from lack of oxygen. I'm so sorry. He was worse than I thought he'd be. The real service comment was completely out of line. I can't believe he. Arya, I interrupted, pulling over because she was starting to hyperventilate. It's fine. It's not fine. He basically called you inadequate to your face. Yeah, but here's the thing. He doesn't know me, and I don't need his approval to love you. She stared at me, eyes watering. You love me. Oh, right. First time saying that. Apparently, I'd chosen to debut it immediately after her father implied I was disappointing. Yeah, I said. I really do. Even if your dad thinks I'm the human equivalent of a participation trophy. She kissed me, hard, right there in the car on some Connecticut side street. I love you too. And my father is wrong about you. Maybe. Or maybe I'll just have to prove him wrong over time. That could take years. Good thing I'm committed, despite only serving 12 years. She laughed through her tears, and we drove home with the radio playing and both of us pretending the dinner hadn't been as bad as it absolutely was. Planning a wedding when your future father-in-law thinks you're a professional disappointment is exactly as fun as it sounds, which is to say not fun at all, more like a prolonged exercise in stress management and diplomatic negotiations. Arya wanted her father to walk her down the aisle because apparently that's tradition, and tradition matters even when tradition involves a man who thinks your life choices are personally offensive. I wanted to elope to Vegas and get married by an Elvis impersonator, which would have been cheaper, faster, and significantly less likely to result in passive-aggressive speeches about my inadequacy. We compromised, as couples do, which meant we did it her way, but I got to pick the food. The wedding was set for late September at this venue in upstate New York that looked like someone had taken a barn, given it a trust fund, and told it to become sophisticated. Exposed wooden beams, string lights everywhere, tables decorated with flowers that probably cost more than my first car, and a guest list that was split evenly between Arya's corporate lawyer friends who discussed billable hours like sports statistics, and my military buddies who showed up looking uncomfortable in suits they'd clearly borrowed. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give it that. Arya looked absolutely devastating in her wedding dress. The kind of beautiful that makes you forget how to breathe properly and wonder what you did to deserve this woman walking toward you. Her father walked her down the aisle with the posture of a man escorting a princess to meet a barely adequate suitor, his face set in an expression that could have been pride or constipation, honestly hard to tell with Gregory. Miles was my best man, naturally, because the guy who survives the Arctic with you earns that position automatically. He stood next to me, occasionally elbowing me when I looked too nervous, whispering, "Don't pass out, don't pass out," like a mantra designed to make me more likely to pass out. My hands were sweating, my collar felt too tight, and I was acutely aware that 200 people were watching me marry someone so far out of my league that we weren't even playing the same sport. But then Arya reached the altar. Her father handed her over with a handshake that once again tested my bone density, and she smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. We said our vows. Hers were beautiful and eloquent because she's a lawyer who's good with words. Mine were sincere and probably grammatically questionable because I was nervous and my brain had temporarily forgotten how sentences worked. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. I kissed my bride, and everyone applauded like we'd accomplished something impressive instead of just promising to tolerate each other forever. The reception started smoothly. Dinner was served, a choice between chicken or fish that the catering company had prepared with the kind of competence that makes you think maybe you didn't waste absurd amounts of money. My military friends were getting along surprisingly well with Arya's corporate colleagues, probably because alcohol is a universal language. Miles was flirting with one of Arya's law school friends, and she was laughing at his stories about my terrible navigation skills, which was both betraying and somehow endearing. Then came the toasts, because apparently weddings require public speaking from people who've been drinking and have access to microphones. Margaret went first, giving a sweet speech about watching Arya grow up, about how proud she was, about how she knew I'd take good care of her daughter. It was lovely, genuine, made several people tear up, and set the bar unreasonably high for everyone who followed. Marcus went next, told some embarrassing stories about Arya's childhood that involved her trying to court-martial her Barbies for conduct unbecoming, and everyone laughed in that warm way that makes speeches successful. He raised his glass, said something about wishing us happiness, and sat down to solid applause. Then Gregory stood up, and I felt Arya tense beside me like she was preparing for impact. Her hand found mine under the table, squeezed hard enough that I was concerned about blood flow, and she whispered, "Please don't react. Please don't react," like a prayer. Gregory held his champagne glass like it was evidence in a court-martial. He looked around the room, making eye contact with guests like he was commanding troops, and began his toast with the confidence of a man who'd never considered that maybe some thoughts should stay internal. "To my daughter, Arya," he started, "and so far so good, completely appropriate father of the bride material. You have always been extraordinary, brilliant, accomplished, destined for greatness. Your mother and I couldn't be more proud of the woman you've become." People nodded, smiled. This was nice. This was normal. I started to relax, thinking maybe Gregory would keep it classy. Maybe the open bar had mellowed him. Maybe miracles do happen. Then he turned to look at me, and I knew immediately that I'd relaxed too soon. "And to my daughter's husband, Adrian," he continued, with a pause that felt deliberate and ominous. "May your flights be smoother than your life choices." The room went quiet in that special way that happens when someone says something that's technically a joke, but everyone knows it's actually an insult wearing a joke's clothing. A few people laughed nervously, not sure if they were supposed to find it funny or pretend they hadn't heard it. Arya's grip on my hand tightened to the point where I was pretty sure she was trying to prevent me from responding through sheer physical force. Miles, sitting at the head table, looked at me with eyes that very clearly said, "Don't do it, Adrian. Don't take the bait." Margaret's smile had frozen on her face like she'd been flash-frozen mid-expression. Marcus was staring at his plate like it might provide answers about why his father was like this. But here's the thing about being publicly insulted at your own wedding. You've got two choices. Take it and look weak, or respond and look petty. I chose secret option 3, respond and make it count. I stood up, slowly, picking up my champagne glass with the kind of deliberate calm that I'd learned from years of dealing with emergency situations. Arya whispered, "Adrian, no." But it was too late. I was committed to this course of action like a pilot who'd already begun landing and couldn't abort. "Admiral Holt," I said, loud enough that everyone could hear, projecting my voice the way the military teaches you for command situations. "Thank you for that interesting toast. I'd like to propose one of my own." I turned to face the crowd, saw 200 faces watching this unfold with the kind of fascinated horror people have watching reality TV or car accidents. "To my father-in-law, Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt." I raised my glass high, made sure everyone was paying attention. May his next promotion include humility, because apparently, his current rank didn't come with any. The room erupted in chaos. Half the guests gasped like I'd just committed a crime against wedding etiquette, which I probably had. The other half made sounds that could have been coughs, but were definitely suppressed laughter, faces turning red from the effort of not losing it completely. Miles dropped his fork, the clatter echoing in the shocked silence. One of Arya's cousins actually choked on her champagne and had to be patted on the back by her husband. Gregory's face went through several interesting color changes, starting at pink, moving through red, and landing somewhere near purple. His jaw clenched so tight I worried about his dental work. Margaret looked like she was trying to decide whether to laugh or cry or possibly fake a medical emergency to distract everyone. Arya kicked me under the table, hard, her pointed heel connecting with my shin with the force of a woman who could have been a professional soccer player if she'd chosen violence as a career path. I was pretty sure she'd left a bruise that would last through our honeymoon, possibly longer. But she was also biting her lip, and I could see the corner of her mouth twitching like she was fighting not to smile. I sat down, took a sip of champagne like I'd just commented on the weather instead of verbally sparring with an admiral at my own wedding reception, and waited for the fallout. The DJ, bless him, recognized a moment that needed intervention and immediately started playing the first dance song, probably ahead of schedule, but definitely saving us from prolonged awkwardness. As Arya and I walked to the dance floor for our first dance as a married couple, she whispered in my ear, "I cannot believe you just did that." "Worth it?" I asked. "So worth it. But you're sleeping on the couch during our honeymoon. We're staying in a hotel suite. There's a very nice couch. Then I guess you'll get to know it well." We danced, and over her shoulder, I could see Gregory still standing at his table, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd underestimated his opponent. Margaret was talking to him, Probably damage control, and he was nodding with the expression of someone receiving information they didn't particularly want to hear. Miles found me later during the reception, after several more drinks had smoothed over the tension and people had moved on to dancing and eating cake. "Man," he said, "that was the most spectacular social suicide I've ever witnessed." Or, I countered, "It was establishing boundaries." Boundaries? Sure. That's what we're calling insulting an admiral at your own wedding now. Boundaries. He started it. "Are you 5? Mentally?" "Sometimes." The rest of the reception proceeded without further warfare, though I noticed Gregory and I maintained a careful distance from each other, like two boxers who'd agreed to wait until the next round. Arya relaxed after the third glass of champagne, laughing with her friends, dancing with her brother, and occasionally shooting me looks that said both, "I love you," and "We're discussing this later." As we left the reception, rice and rose petals being thrown by guests who were way too drunk to aim properly, Arya turned to me. "You know he's never going to forgive you for that toast." "Good," I said. "Match point for me." "This isn't a game, Adrian." "Isn't it, though?" And I just scored. She laughed, kissed me, and we drove off to our honeymoon with one of my best life choices and one very angry admiral behind us. Totally worth it. Fast forward 3 years into married life. 3 years of enduring family dinners where Gregory treated me like furniture that occasionally talked back. 3 years of proving myself in my consulting career while my father-in-law continued to act like I was cosplaying as a professional adult. Marriage to Arya was everything I'd hoped for. Genuinely the best decision I'd ever made. Worth every awkward holiday and passive-aggressive comment about my unconventional career path. But Gregory remained Gregory, unchanging as a statue dedicated to disappointment. And I'd honestly made peace with the fact that he'd probably go to his grave thinking I was the worst thing that happened to his daughter since she got mono in college. Then the Navy sent me an invitation, and by invitation I mean a strongly worded request that was technically optional, but carried the implication that declining would be noted in some permanent record somewhere. They wanted me to observe a joint operations briefing at the naval base, something about consultants providing civilian perspective on tactical decision-making, which sounded like bureaucratic nonsense, but came with a day rate that made saying no financially irresponsible. Arya found me that morning trying to decide between business casual and actual business attire, standing in front of my closet like it might provide guidance on how to dress for reuniting with military culture after years away. "Please, Adrian," she said, adjusting my collar with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. "Don't start anything." "Start anything? Me? I'm a professional consultant who never starts anything. You told my father his promotion should include humility at our wedding reception, in front of 200 people, during a toast. That was 3 years ago, and technically he started it by insulting my life choices during his toast. Adrian." She used my full name, which is never a good sign, like when parents use all 3 names before grounding you. "My father will be running this briefing. You'll be in a room with him for potentially hours. Please, for the love of everything holy, do not engage in psychological warfare." "I won't," I said, with the confidence of a man who absolutely would if provoked sufficiently. "I'll be the model of professional courtesy. Silent observer. Practically invisible." She looked at me with the skepticism of someone who'd been married to me long enough to know that my promises of good behavior had varying degrees of reliability. "Just try, please. For me. For you. I will be a paragon of restraint and maturity." That's what worries me. You only use words like paragon when you're planning something. She kissed me goodbye, headed to her office where she'd spend the day arguing about corporate mergers or hostile takeovers or whatever lawyers argue about. And I drove to the naval base feeling like I was heading back to a place I'd left behind but never quite escaped. Military bases have a smell, you know? A combination of jet fuel, determination, and institutional paint that brings back memories whether you want them or not. The security checkpoint took 20 minutes because apparently my credentials needed verification, re-verification, and possibly a background check to confirm I hadn't become a spy since leaving active duty. By the time I made it to the conference room, I was already regretting this entire enterprise and mentally calculating whether the day rate was worth the hassle. The conference room was exactly as I remembered from the opening scene of this particular disaster. Airless, fluorescent lit, filled with 40 officers who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. They sat in neat rows, uniforms pressed to perfection, holding coffee cups like emotional support animals, and radiating the collective energy of people attending a mandatory meeting about meetings. And there, at the head of the room, was Gregory. Fleet Admiral Gregory Holt, my father-in-law, standing in front of a presentation screen with the confidence of a man who'd never been contradicted in his life and didn't plan to start today. He looked exactly like he did at family dinners. Impeccable posture, silver hair that probably got its own military pension, and an expression that suggested he found the world mildly disappointing but was too professional to say so explicitly. I tried to slip into a back row seat, attempting my best impression of someone who wasn't related to the presenter through marriage and mutual disdain. But Gregory had the situational awareness of a man who'd commanded fleets, and he spotted me immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that he'd registered my presence, and I swear I saw the ghost of something that might have been annoyance flicker across his face before the professional mask returned. The briefing started with all the excitement of watching paint dry in real time. PowerPoint slides about operational readiness, tactical coordination, resource allocation, all presented in that special military monotone that could make an action movie sound boring. Officers took notes with the enthusiasm of prisoners logging time served. Someone's phone vibrated, and Gregory's glare made the guy practically disassemble it on the spot. Then Gregory shifted to discussing decision-making in extreme weather conditions, and I felt my attention sharpen like I'd been injected with espresso directly into my brain. He stood there, pointer in hand, clicking through slides about risk assessment and command authority, and delivered what I'm sure he thought was sage wisdom about tactical operations. The key to successful operations in adverse weather, he said, voice carrying that command authority that made people sit straighter involuntarily, is knowing when to abort. A commander must weigh all factors, consider all variables, and make the decision that best serves the mission while protecting personnel. I nearly choked on the coffee I'd been drinking, the irony hitting me like a physical force. This was the same man who'd overruled an abort recommendation during my Arctic mission. The same man whose brother had been part of the team I'd rescued specifically because Gregory had decided the mission was more important than the meteorological warning signs that screamed, "This is a terrible idea." Gregory continued, apparently unaware that he was standing in front of someone who had personal experience with his decision-making philosophy. Sometimes civilian consultants and junior officers lack the experience to understand these nuances. They see the immediate risk without understanding the broader strategic picture. Oh, he was going there. He was actually going to use this briefing as a platform for subtle jabs at civilian consultants, which was absolutely a reference to me, sitting right there in the third row. Several officers glanced in my direction, probably wondering if I'd noticed the implied insult, possibly taking bets on whether this would end badly. I kept my expression neutral, channeling every poker face I'd learned during my military career, while internally cataloging the various ways I could respond to this provocation. Then Gregory made his fatal mistake. He turned, made direct eye contact with me, and with a smirk that could have stripped paint, said, "Perhaps our civilian guest would like to share his expertise on tactical decision-making. Adrian, would you care to contribute to this discussion?" The room went silent. 40 officers turned to stare at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head or possibly caught fire. Gregory stood there looking smug, like he'd just delivered a killing blow, probably expecting me to stammer something embarrassing or decline politely, thereby proving his point about civilian consultants lacking relevant experience. Aria's voice echoed in my head. "Don't start anything." I heard it clearly, her pleading tone from this morning, asking me to be mature and professional and restrained. Then I thought about 3 years of passive-aggressive dinner conversations. 3 years of implications that I wasn't good enough, didn't understand real service, had taken the easy path by leaving active duty. 3 years of watching this man treat me like I was a disappointing appliance his daughter had insisted on keeping. I stood up slowly, smoothing my shirt, giving myself a moment to formulate a response that would be both factual and devastating. "Actually, Admiral, I do have some relevant experience with tactical decision-making in extreme weather conditions." Gregory's smirk widened slightly, like I was walking into a trap. "Please, enlighten us." February 2019. Arctic Circle. 12-man recon team trapped in a blizzard with winds gusting to 70 miles per hour, visibility measured in feet, temperatures at -45 before wind chill. I kept my voice conversational, like I was discussing weekend plans instead of dropping a verbal bomb. Command deemed the conditions unflyable. Every senior pilot agreed. Standard protocol would have been to wait for the storm to pass. A few officers were nodding, probably remembering the incident or similar situations. Gregory's smirk was starting to fade, replaced by something that might have been recognition or possibly indigestion. But waiting wasn't an option, I continued, because that recon team had maybe 3 hours before hypothermia turned them into casualties. So someone had to make a tactical decision, follow standard protocol, and potentially lose 12 men, or violate every safety recommendation and attempt a rescue that looked suicidal on paper. The room was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet, and everyone would have jumped. I flew that mission, through a whiteout so severe we couldn't see our own rotor blades. My co-pilot prayed so loudly he probably saved several souls through sheer volume. We hovered in conditions that should have flipped our aircraft, extracted all 12 men, and brought them home alive. Gregory's face had gone pale, color draining like someone had opened a valve. His hand gripped the pointer so hard I thought it might snap. And the interesting part, Admiral, is that Mission Command had actually recommended aborting earlier in the day, before the weather deteriorated. But that recommendation was overruled by a senior officer who decided the strategic value of the reconnaissance outweighed the meteorological concerns. That decision is what put those 12 men in a position where they needed an unflyable rescue in the first place. Several officers were sitting forward now, recognizing the story, probably piecing together the implications. One captain's eyes went wide as he connected the dots. Someone in the back row, a young lieutenant who clearly hadn't learned about professional discretion yet, raised his hand. "Sir, what was your call sign for that operation?" This was it. The moment. I could feel it crystallizing, the perfect convergence of truth, irony, and 3 years of accumulated frustration. I looked directly at Gregory, watched his face cycle through expressions as he started to understand where this was going, and smiled. Black Widow. 2 words. That's all it took for the entire room to explode into chaos. By lunchtime, the entire naval base knew. And I mean everyone. The story had spread through the military grapevine faster than classified information during a security breach, which is saying something because military gossip travels at approximately the speed of light when it's good. I couldn't walk 15 feet without someone stopping me. Officers I'd never met looking at me like I'd just performed a miracle or possibly committed the most spectacular act of social suicide they'd ever witnessed. "That's him," I heard whispered as I walked past a group of junior officers in the corridor. "That's Black Widow. The guy who just destroyed Admiral Holt in front of everyone." Destroyed felt like a strong word. I preferred educated, or maybe provided historical context. But sure, destroyed worked too. A lieutenant commander actually stopped mid-conversation to stare at me, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth like he'd forgotten how drinking worked. 2 ensigns whispered to each other, and then one of them, a kid who looked like he'd graduated from the academy approximately 15 minutes ago, actually approached me with the enthusiasm of someone meeting their favorite celebrity. "Excuse me, sir," he said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Would you mind if I got your autograph? Or maybe a photo?" My dad was Navy aviation, and he told me stories about Operation Frostline. He's not going to believe I actually met you. I signed his phone case with as sharp as someone produced from nowhere, took a photo with the kid who looked like Christmas had come early, and wondered if this was what winning a Grammy felt like. Except instead of a music award, I'd won the most dramatic conference room revelation category, which wasn't actually a category but probably should be. My phone started buzzing around noon, Aria's name flashing on the screen with the kind of insistence that suggested I should answer immediately or prepare for consequences. I ducked into an empty office, closed the door, and braced myself for the incoming storm. "Adrian Cole," she said, her voice doing that thing where she tried to sound furious, but I could hear the laughter underneath, like she was fighting a losing battle with her own amusement. "What did you do?" "I attended a briefing, like you asked me to. Very professionally. Took notes and everything. Don't play innocent with me. My father just called my mother, who called me, And apparently you revealed in front of 40 officers that you're Black Widow? The Black Widow? The pilot from the Arctic mission that everyone talks about. I mean, when you phrase it like that, it sounds dramatic. I just introduced myself properly. Used my government name, so to speak. You humiliated my father in front of his subordinates. She was definitely laughing now, trying to sound angry but failing spectacularly. He called you princess, and you basically dropped a tactical nuke on his entire worldview. Correction, he humiliated himself. I just added subtitles to a situation he created. Also, he's been calling me worse than princess for 3 years, so this feels like overdue clarification. She made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. I told you not to start anything. I specifically said, don't start anything. Those were my exact words this morning. And I didn't start anything. He asked me to contribute to the discussion. I contributed historical facts. If those facts happen to reveal that he's been mocking the person who saved his brother's life, while simultaneously proving his tactical judgment caused the crisis in the first place, well, that's just unfortunate timing. You're impossible. You married me anyway. That's on you. She laughed properly then, the kind of laugh that meant I wasn't in actual trouble, just theoretical trouble that would be mentioned during future arguments for comedic effect. My mom says Dad locked himself in his office. Won't talk to anyone. That's fair. I'd probably need some processing time too if I discovered I'd been an ass to someone for 3 years based on completely wrong assumptions. We talked for a few more minutes, Arya filling me in on the family drama that was apparently unfolding in real time, Margaret trying to mediate, Marcus reportedly laughing so hard he had to leave the room during his mother's phone call. By the time we hung up, I felt pretty good about the situation. Sure, I'd caused chaos, but it was justified chaos, the best kind. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Admiral Holt requests your presence in his office. Building C, 3rd floor. Formal, professional, and slightly ominous. I considered ignoring it, maybe faking a sudden illness or important consulting emergency, but curiosity won out over self-preservation. Gregory's office was exactly what you'd expect, meticulously organized, decorated with commendations and photos documenting a distinguished career, and intimidating in that way that offices of powerful people always are. He sat behind his desk, still in his uniform, looking like he'd aged a decade since the morning briefing. I expected thunder. Expected him to tear into me about protocol and respect and appropriate venues for revelation. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from his desk, his expression unreadable. I called you princess, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. In front of 40 officers, I mocked you. Called you inadequate in a dozen different ways over 3 years. And the entire time, you were the pilot who saved my brother's life. Yes, sir. Dean wrote me a letter after that mission. Told me about the pilot who flew through impossible conditions. Called him the bravest person he'd ever met. I kept that letter. Read it at his funeral. He finally looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something other than disapproval. I've been an ass. Sir, I said carefully, I've been called worse. Usually by Arya during IKEA assembly. She gets very intense about furniture instructions. He laughed. Actually laughed. First time I'd ever heard it. And it was startling, like watching a statue suddenly develop a sense of humor. Can we start over? Sure, I agreed. But I'm keeping the call sign. Wouldn't dream of taking it from you, son. Son, that was new. I'd take it. Months after the conference room incident that became legendary enough to probably end up in some future Navy training manual about what not to do to your son-in-law, I stumbled onto information that I wish I'd known 3 years earlier. Turns out Gregory wasn't just some random senior officer who'd overruled the abort recommendation on my Arctic mission. He was the officer, the one who'd looked at meteorological data that screamed, everyone will die, and decided strategic intelligence gathering was worth the risk. I found out through Miles, who'd heard it from someone who'd heard it from someone else in that military telephone game, where information gets passed around until everyone knows everything. Dude, Miles said over beers at our usual bar, your father-in-law was the one who sent those guys out in that storm. He's the reason you had to fly that suicide mission. The irony was so thick you could bottle it and sell it as a luxury product. Gregory had spent 3 years judging my service record while sitting on the secret that his decision-making had created the crisis I'd solved. When the Navy opened a review into that mission, examining why 12 men had nearly died for intelligence that turned out to be marginally useful at best. I figured Gregory would do what most senior officers do: deflect, minimize, blame subordinates, protect his record. Instead, he stood before a review panel and said something I never expected. I wasn't there, but multiple people told me about it, each adding their own dramatic flourishes, but the core truth remained: Gregory admitted fault. Publicly. Major Cole was right to question the decision, he'd said, according to the official transcript. I overruled the abort recommendation. That decision put 12 men at risk and cost lives on subsequent missions where we didn't have a Black Widow available. Don't make my mistake. The Navy, in their infinite wisdom, didn't demote him. Instead, they made him teach leadership courses, which felt like progress over punishment. Turning your mistakes into lessons for others seemed more valuable than destroying a career over one bad call, even if that call had nearly killed his own brother. A year later, I attended one of those courses, partly out of curiosity, partly because Arya had asked me to give her father another chance. Gregory stood on stage, silver hair catching the auditorium lights like he'd been professionally lit for the occasion, and delivered a lecture about humility and command that was surprisingly self-aware. I once mocked a man who taught me humility the hard way, he said, and I realized with dawning horror that he was talking about me. Call sign, Black Widow. He flew a mission I'd made necessary through my own arrogance, saved 12 lives including my brother's, and then had the grace to let me be an ass to him for 3 years before finally setting me straight. He's the bravest pilot I've ever known, and I'm proud to call him family. After the lecture, he found me, handed me an envelope with hands that shook slightly. Inside was a note, yellowed with age, Dean's handwriting instantly recognizable from the Christmas cards he used to send. Tell the pilot he showed me heaven, it read. It was made of ice and rotor blades. I kept that note. Still have it. The real kicker came 6 months later when the Navy unveiled their new helicopter model, the BW-01 Widow, named after yours truly. They held this whole ceremony, asked me to speak, and I stood at that podium looking at 200 faces, including Gregory's, and couldn't resist one final callback. Funny how things work out, I said. 3 years ago, someone called me Princess. Now the fleet flies under my name. That's what we call character growth. The audience roared. Gregory, standing in the front row next to Arya, who was filming this on her phone for posterity, actually smiled like he finally understood the cosmic joke. Above us, the Black Widow prototype gleamed in the sunset, all sleek lines and military precision, and I thought about Dean, who'd have loved this moment. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes the guy who thinks you're not good enough ends up learning he was wrong in the most public way possible. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to name a helicopter after yourself and make princess jokes at naval ceremonies. I'd call that a win.